a hidden constraint that shaped an entire business era. It wasn't written into strategy decks. It never appeared on performance dashboards. And yet for years, it quietly dictated what the company could build, how fast it could move, and which futures were even imaginable. A constraint so embedded that no one thought to name it, until it was too late to ignore. To understand why this story matters now, we need to return to the company's early success. Growth came quickly. Decisions were made under pressure. Systems were built fast, optimized for speed rather than longevity. At the time, the trade-offs felt obvious. Solve today's problems. Deal with tomorrow later. The constraint was born in that moment, not as a limitation, but as a shortcut. Our story begins with an architectural choice made to accelerate launch. It simplified development, reduced complexity, allowed the company to scale rapidly in its formative years. Leadership celebrated the decision as pragmatic, necessary, smart, and for a long time it was. But constraints don't expire on their own. As the company matured, that early choice became invisible infrastructure. New features were designed around it. Teams learned how to work within it, hiring favored people who could navigate its boundaries. Over time, the constraint stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like reality itself. Occasionally, someone would question why certain things were hard, why changes took longer than expected, why competitors moved faster in certain areas. The answers were always vague. It's complicated. That's just how the system works. The constraint had no name, only symptoms. Leadership interpreted the friction as growing pains, the cost of scale, the price of success. They invested in process, tooling, and coordination to manage the complexity, never realizing they were managing around a single foundational limit. What no one saw yet was that the constraint wasn't just slowing the company down. It was shaping what the company believed was possible. And once belief narrows, strategy follows. The hidden constraint had already begun defining an entire era of decisions, quietly, consistently, and without resistance. As the company expanded, the hidden constraint revealed itself through friction rather than failure. Projects took longer to deliver, not because teams lacked skill, but because every change rippled across the system. Small updates required extensive coordination. Simple ideas demanded complex workarounds. The organization learned to plan cautiously, padding timelines to account for surprises no one could quite predict. Teams adapted in familiar ways. Engineers became experts at navigating constraint instead of questioning it. Product managers scoped ideas to fit within its limits. Leaders praised teams that delivered despite the difficulty, mistaking endurance for effectiveness. The constraint wasn't challenged. It was respected. Over time, this respect turned into dependence. New initiatives were evaluated not on customer value alone, but on how painful they would be to implement. Ambitious ideas were quietly filtered out before reaching leadership, not because they were bad, but because they collided with the invisible boundary everyone had learned to avoid. Strategy narrowed, not by intention, but by feasibility as defined by the past. The first external warning appeared when competitors began releasing features the company struggled to match. These weren't radical innovations, just flexible, responsive updates that adapted quickly to market changes. Leadership attributed the gap to differences in scale, resources, or focus. The idea that a foundational constraint was shaping outcomes remained unspoken. An experienced engineer raised the issue during a technical review. They explained how the original architectural choice limited adaptability, creating cascading complexity over time. The explanation was met with nods and resignation. Rebuilding, they said, would be too risky, too expensive, too disruptive. The constraint was acknowledged, then set aside. Instead, the company invested in mitigation. Layers were added. Abstractions multiplied. Processes grew more elaborate to compensate for structural rigidity. Each fix reduced pain in the short term while deepening reliance on the underlying constraint. The system grew heavier, not stronger. Meanwhile, customer expectations evolved. Speed mattered more. Customization increased. Integration demands multiplied. The market rewarded companies that could adapt quickly. Inside the company, Those demands translated into stress. Teams work harder to deliver less. The gap between effort and outcome widened. Still, the company endured. Revenue held. The brand remained respected. From the outside, the business looked healthy, but inside, strategy had begun orbiting the constraint. Choices were made to avoid triggering it. Futures were imagined within its limits. The constraint had succeeded in its quiet work. It had not broken the company. It had bounded it. And what remains bounded long enough eventually defines itself by those boundaries. The consequences became visible when the company attempted its most ambitious initiative in years. A bold move meant to redefine its position in the market. The vision was sound. The demand was real. Leadership believed this was the moment to prove the company could still lead, not just endure. But as planning deepened, the constraints surfaced everywhere. Timelines stretched. Dependencies multiplied. Each proposed feature uncovered hidden complexity tied back to the same architectural choice made years earlier. Teams warned that delivery would require either unprecedented coordination or uncomfortable compromise. Leadership pushed forward anyway, convinced determination could overcome structure. Execution was brutal. Teams worked nights. Temporary fixes stacked on top of permanent ones. The product launched. Technically successful, strategically underwhelming. It met specifications, but not expectations. Customers sensed hesitation where there should have been confidence. Flexibility where there should have been clarity. The initiative didn't fail outright, but it failed to inspire. Post-launch reviews revealed the truth no one wanted to say aloud. The company wasn't struggling because of ambition. It was struggling because ambition had been framed by a system never designed to support it. The hidden constraint had shaped every decision long before execution began. The conflict peaked when leadership compared outcomes with smaller competitors' parallel launch. Fewer resources, less history, more adaptability. The difference wasn't talent or vision. It was freedom. Freedom to build without negotiating with the past. That comparison changed the tone of the conversation. The constraint was no longer abstract. It was measurable. Visible, responsible for real opportunity cost. For the first time, leadership acknowledged that the era defined by that early shortcut had reached its limit. The debate was no longer whether the constraint existed. It was whether the company was willing to confront it. Some argued rebuilding would jeopardize everything. Others argued the real danger was continuing to pretend mitigation was progress. The room divided not on strategy, but on appetite for discomfort. Because addressing a hidden constraint isn't a technical decision. It's an identity decision. It forces a company to admit that what once made it successful now holds it back. That endurance is not the same as health. That survival is not the same as leadership. The era shaped by the constraint was ending. The question was whether the company would choose the next era deliberately or be carried into it by force. The decision arrived without drama, but with finality. Leadership accepted what had slowly become undeniable. The hidden constraint had outlived its usefulness. What once enabled speed now enforced caution. What once simplified choices now narrowed them. The era it shaped could not continue without costing the company its future. The climax wasn't the choice to rebuild. It was a moment the company stopped defending the past. Leaders acknowledged openly that the shortcut made years earlier had been rational, and that clinging to it now was not. This wasn't a failure of foresight. It was a failure of timing. The willingness to move on had arrived late, but it had arrived. The work that followed was difficult and unsatisfying. Systems were dismantled carefully. Dependencies unraveled slowly. Teams faced frustration as familiar patterns disappeared. Progress felt invisible for months. From the outside, it looked like stagnation. From the inside, it was reconstruction. But something changed during that process. For the first time in years, strategy expanded instead of contracting. Ideas previously dismissed as impractical re-entered discussion. Teams stopped asking whether something was possible and started asking whether it was right. The constraint, once removed, revealed how much mental space it had occupied. The resolution didn't restore the company to its former dominance. It restored something more important: range. The ability to choose again. the ability to imagine futures without negotiating with decisions made long ago under different conditions. Looking back, leadership recognized a pattern clearly. Hidden constraints don't announce themselves as problems. They announce themselves as limits that feel normal. They shape behavior quietly, then strategy, then identity. And by the time they're named, they've already defined an era. The companies that endure are not the ones that avoid constraints. They are the ones that know when to outgrow them, because every era ends, and the most dangerous moment is mistaking endurance for inevitability. Subscribe to join the journey. A hidden